Morning, everybody. This week in the House, we're making important progress on two fronts. First, our committees are set to begin holding legislative hearings on bills to deliver relief for Americans struggling under Obamacare. This is the next step in a step-by-step approach to repealing and replacing Obamacare with affordable, patient-centered system. We know that this law is collapsing. We hear it every day from our constituents. We hear it from the families who tell us the deductibles are so high it doesn't feel like they have insurance. We hear it from the people who've been denied choices. This law is collapsing, and we need to step in and restore real choices and real competition so that we can actually lower costs for patients and families. Second, under the Congressional Review Act, the House will expedite 5 resolutions to block costly, harmful regulations. This includes turning the page on what has been, for the last 8 years, a war on coal jobs in America. These measures will deliver relief from regulations that threaten to wipe out thousands, if not thousands, of jobs in the energy industry. In addition, we're setting in motion reforms for a more sensible regulatory reform system. Earlier this month, we passed the REINS Act, which requires congressional approval of any new major regulation. And yesterday, the President took action to cap the costs that regulators can impose each year. This regulatory budget is something that we actually proposed in our agenda that we ran on last year, and we're very excited to see it off and running. So this is not just about blocking bad regulations. This is about smart regulations. This is about jobs and economic opportunity and entrepreneurs and small businesses and manufacturers. We want to pave the way for real growth, higher wages, and more success for the workers and the small businesses who are at the heart of our economy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Regulatory reform has been a primary focus of this House since week one. We've been engaged in a two-step process. The first step was changing the structure of Washington, putting the power back to the people. That's where you saw the passage of the REINS Act and the Regulatory Accountability Act. Now we're starting on part 2, the Congressional Review Act. I'm not going to go through the full list that we're going to have this week, but let me highlight just 2 of them. We will start with the stream buffer rule. Stream buffer rule actually could affect more than 64% of the county's coal reserve, put them on off limits. We're talking roughly somewhere between 40 to 78,000 jobs are threatened. Talk about bringing America's energy back, all the above jobs, and a whole part of America that has lost work. This regulatory reform bill with CRA will see a fundamental change. Secondly, we're going to bring up on Friday Bureau of Land Management methane rule. I'm going to have Mr. Tipton talk a little bit more about that. But what you're finding with the Congressional Review Act, they now become privileged starting January 30th. You'll see for the next 2 weeks, looking at those rules, finding the common sense for the last legislative days, ways that we can keep the environment safe and still bring jobs back to America. That's the focus of this House. It's the focus of this Congress, and we will get the work done.
The House is going to pass bills this week to bring jobs back to America by rolling back some of the radical regulations that were put in place by unelected bureaucrats in Washington. I think it's exciting to see that we're continuing to focus on creating jobs and getting our economy moving again and rebuilding the middle class that a lot of Barack Obama's policies helped erode. I think if you look in the last week, it's been very significant for those of us who stand up in defense of innocent life. Last week, before we left for Philadelphia, we passed historic legislation making permanent the Hyde Amendment, a bill that was very bipartisan, a bill that most Americans support, the idea that taxpayer money should not go towards financing and funding abortion. And then we saw hundreds of thousands of people come to Washington for the March for Life. And I applaud the thousands of people from Louisiana and the hundreds of thousands of young people who came to Washington to stand up for innocent life. And then, of course, later today, President Trump is going to announce his Supreme Court pick to replace Antonin Scalia. Looking forward to a spirited debate about the foundation of our democracy, the way that the Constitution is supposed to be carried out by the judicial branch. I think it's important to note right now that you've already got Senate Democrats saying that they're going to oppose President Trump's pick for the Supreme Court before they even know who it is. That's an incredible level of irresponsibility by Senate Democrats who should be looking to carry out their role of advice and consent instead of prejudging somebody before they even know who that's going to be. So I would hope that the Senate actually does their job, and Senate Democrats that are trying to block President Trump's agenda would actually allow him to carry out his job. And just look at his picks for cabinet secretaries. At this point in Barack Obama's tenure as president in his first term, just in his first week, Barack Obama had 11 of his 15 cabinet secretaries already confirmed and working for the American people. Today, Donald Trump only has 2 of his 15 cabinet secretaries approved by the Senate. So it's time for Senate Democrats to stop blocking the work that the American people elected President Trump to do, and let's get our economy going again like we're taking action in the House to do.
Our unified Republican government is an opportunity for positive disruption from the status quo that we've seen the last few years under President Obama. The status quo that puts bureaucrats before people with their pages and pages of rules and regulations. So this week we're taking action on the explosion of regulations that we've seen hurting families and costing us jobs all across the country. That's why we wanted Representative Tipton to join us, because he's really been a leader hard at work on the Congressional Review Act to help roll back some of the most damaging regulations of the last 8 years. Every day we hear stories of people that are stuck in the red tape. Colleges and universities bound by mandates. Tech companies and startups trying to deal with the overtime rules. Families and small business owners that are just trying to get by. But even with all of this happening, we're focusing our efforts to repeal Obamacare and replace it with people-first health care that's going to work for everybody. This week at Energy and Commerce, we're holding hearings on the next steps for replacing Obamacare. Republicans are working to make sure pre-existing conditions are covered. The insurance market is stabilized, and Medicaid is strengthened and prioritized for those who need it most. President Trump has made clear that he is a man of action, and we are ready.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Scott Tipton out of Colorado's 3rd Congressional District. The House will take important action this week to undo some of the most harmful attacks the previous administration perpetrated on hardworking Americans across the country during its final months. I'm a firm believer that when done right, regulations play an important role in keeping our communities safe and secure. But what we saw out of the Obama administration during its final months went far beyond safety and security. Our concerns about the stream buffer rule, venting and flaring rules, and the BLM's 2.0 rules, and many others fell on deaf ears during the Obama administration's final days. What we saw was an outgoing administration more concerned about approval ratings than about the livelihoods of American families. We lost 68,000 coal mining jobs during the Obama administration. Standing here in Washington, it may be hard to imagine the impact of losing those jobs. But for families that I visit with every time that I'm home, it means falling behind on your mortgage, struggling to be able to put food on the table for your children, and picking which bills will have to go unpaid this month. In the twilight hours of the Obama administration, the Department of Interior finalized a rule that applied to every coal mine in every state in the country, when it was originally only supposed to apply to the surface mines in 6 Appalachian states. The rule amends over 400 existing regulations, including some that are normally in the jurisdiction of other agencies. The complex and duplicative requirements in the rule could lead to a 60% reduction in coal production in a state like Colorado. There is no clearer example of a federal agency implementing a redundant one-size-fits-all mandate than this last-ditch effort to regulate the coal industry out of business. Another great example of duplicative regulation issued by the Obama administration is the BLM venting and flaring rule. The authority to regulate air quality in the Clean Air Act resides solely with the Environmental Protection Agency and cooperating state agencies, which is why in May of this last year, the EPA finalized its own rule on methane emissions. In point of fact, the BLM venting and flaring rule was largely based on a law passed by the state of Colorado to limit methane emissions. The EPA's own data shows that from 1990 to 2014, methane emissions fell by over 5.5%. So not only did the BLM overstep its jurisdictional authority, it did so when states and private industry have already taken successful steps to improve efficiency in the energy sector. While the stream buffer rule and the methane venting and flaring rules are two that are harmful examples in many districts like my own, all of the Congressional Review Act resolutions that we are considering this week will provide relief for Americans in diverse communities across the country. The House is responding to the signal that Americans sent on November 8th. We're saying no to overly burdensome, one-size-fits-all federal regulations. There is a better way to regulate, and the House has already taken the first steps to help us get there. Earlier this month, we passed the Midnight Rules Relief Act and the RAINS Act, both of which set the stage for implementing the regulatory reform plan that is included in our Better Way agenda. Using the Congressional Review Act this week to roll back the Obama administration's last-minute regulatory overreach puts us on the path to advance the policies we need to create jobs, to keep people earning more of their hard-earned money in their own pockets, and to restore confidence in America that unfortunately has been missing in many of our communities these past 8 years.
Anybody have any questions?
Speaker Ryan, can you let us know what your thoughts are on the President's executive action on immigrants and refugees? And also, can you tell us, is there any immediate role for Congress to play in addressing some of the concerns that have been raised about this?
Yes, so first off, I had a long talk with Secretary Kelly yesterday, and I'm very pleased and confident that he is, on a going-forward basis, going to make sure that things are done correctly. Look, the President has a responsibility to the security of this country. Go back. Remember when we had the Paris shooting? Remember when we heard about credible intelligence that ISIS was trying to infiltrate refugee populations? We passed, I think it was called the SAFE Act, with 289 votes to take a pause in the refugee program to improve our vetting standards. That bill went through the House and didn't go anywhere in the Senate. So what is happening is something that we support, which is we need to pause and we need to make sure that the vetting standards are up to snuff so we can guarantee the safety and security of our country. That is what this does. We want that goal to be achieved. I support the refugee resettlement program. We're a generous country. It's important. But we can be generous and watch our national security at the same time. That's why I'm confident that Secretary Kelly, along with other cabinet members, are going to make sure that we have the proper review and vetting so we can get this program up and running with the proper national security safeguards. Now, I think it's regrettable that there was some confusion on the rollout of this. No one wanted to see people with green cards or special immigrant visas like translators get caught up in all of this. And so I think regrettably, the rollout was confusing. But on a go-forward basis, I'm confident that Secretary Kelly is going to make sure that this is done correctly, that they get a good review, and that we are going to make sure that we get this program up and running with the kind of vetting standards that we all want to see.
No role for Congress then?
There's always a role for Congress. Congress oversees these things all of the time. But this is clearly in keeping with the President's authorities. We all know that. Take a look at immigration law. Look at the way the refugee laws work. And this is very similar to what we passed a year ago after the Paris shooting. We just want to make sure that it's very clear, that people understand what this is and is not, and that on a going-forward basis that it's executed and implemented so that we can have both. We can have a good refugee and resettlement program while making sure that we don't have people trying to infiltrate a refugee program and take advantage of us. Yeah.
Mr. Speaker, when you do a cost-benefit analysis, people from these countries haven't carried out deadly terrorist attacks here in the United States since 9/11, but you have a lot of military experts, intelligence experts warning that this is going to serve as a recruiting tool for ISIS. Are you sure that this is going to make?
I think the rhetoric surrounding this could be used as a recruiting tool, and I think that's dangerous. But remember, these countries were named by the Obama administration. These countries were named in legislation that we talked about last year. So these countries were named by the Obama administration, and there is an issue with respect to terrorists trying to, infiltrate a refugee population. So there is we're not here to debate. We're here to answer your questions. There is nothing wrong with taking a pause and making sure we have the proper vetting standards in place so that we do not have a problem like France had with Paris. Congressional staffers help the administration all of the time. I'll refer you to the Judiciary Committee on the specific aspects of this. As you know, we weren't involved in this. Chairman Goodlatte walked our members through how this worked. I would refer you to him.
Last question.
Yeah.
When you talk about the role of Congress, these are temporary measures. Do you plan to pass any measures? There are reports out of the LA Times that the Trump administration is looking at further immigration limits. What do you have planned in the works? And when were you told specifically about this order? Some of your members said they were caught.
Pretty much at the time it was being issued. I don't know exactly specifically. We were briefed on it, the contents of it, as it was being rolled out. And then I had a very good conversation with Secretary Kelly to make sure that we separate fact from myth, that we make sure that the confusion gets cleared up very quickly. Clearly, none of us want to see people with green cards get implicated in this, and that's not the goal here. So we want to make sure that that's very much cleared up on a go-forward basis. And look, what the president has asked us to focus on, and something that we completely agree on, something we ran on, is we got to secure our border. We have a border security problem. That's what the physical barrier on the border is all about. And we have security concerns given this age of terrorism, given the fact that we have drugs coming across our border. We have an opioid problem. There are lots of reasons why our focus first and foremost is on border security.